From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. Our guest today is an old friend, Larry Pratt, the executive director of Gun Owners of America. Larry is a former state legislator in Virginia. He has a distinguished background in many areas. But let me just begin, Larry, by asking you, why do we need Gun Owners of America? Doesn't the NRA deal with all these issues?
Well, they certainly get involved in all the legislative issues. We don't always see eye to eye. Give you an example of a recent piece of legislation, which I think is a very important one and illustrates that if you don't see the larger picture, you can lose your way for lack of that bigger picture. There was a measure put forth after the Virginia Tech shooting by a very anti-gun member of Congress, Carolyn McCarthy. She comes from New York. And the idea was to make it so you could have your name very easily put on the list of those who can't buy a gun. When you go to buy the gun, the background check is done, and your name will pop up because of a diagnosis for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, just as a matter of fact, people that have that so-called disorder don't have any more experience committing crime than the rest of the population. So there was no factual basis for stigmatizing these people. But the biggest problem that we had with the bill, even beyond the injustice of putting a soldier in that database for that reason.
Focused on members of the military.
Focuses on soldiers primarily because they're the ones that have had their names computerized by the Veterans Administration and then sent over to the FBI. The bill would provide a lot of money so that other people that might have somewhat the same kind of diagnosis are going to be hit subsequently. But we called it the Veterans Disarmament Act because it was obviously going after them first. Well, the idea is that they've now called an adjudication what a psychiatrist writes down as the diagnosis. Now, I've never been to law school, but I've had to pay for plenty of lawyers to help people through Gun Owners of America, and I know that adjudication used to mean you went to a court, it was a judge, he was independent of the administration, he was independent of the legislature, at least that's, supposed to be, and you had a chance to cross-examine and confront your accuser and all those kinds of due process protections. All that's gone.
And, of course, there were a lot of people who believe neither in witch doctors nor psychiatrists.
Yes. They think that maybe you ought to have it out in a court of law. And if you really are a danger to yourself or society, all right, prove it in court. And then we don't have nearly the objection that we would have if we're just going to start signing pieces of paper and sending people's names in. Because after a little while, maybe we don't just send their names somewhere. Maybe we send them somewhere. They used to do that in certain other countries, in the last century, and all on the basis of one guy's opinion. And imagine a psychiatrist telling us that so-and-so might be a danger to himself when this is the profession that has the greatest suicide rate of any in the whole country.
Many people enter that profession because they personally have big problems.
Yes, well, apparently they haven't resolved them all. But anyway, that's another. So that's why the NRA was on the other side with us. And Carolyn McCarthy, the sponsor of the bill, said, this bill would not have moved had it not been for the NRA. And I just don't think they had a clue that they were throwing away the political bedrock of America's limited government system that has provided so much freedom for so many people in this hemisphere. And they just kissed it off like that, as if it were nothing.
Now, you've been very active in filing a brilliant amicus brief concerning the D.C. gun ruling. Tell us about that. What's the background?
Well, D.C. government has had for 31 years in effect, a ban on handguns, complete and total ban, and a virtual ban on other firearms.
And according to Marion Barry, it worked. Marion Barry, the former mayor of D.C., famously said that we have the lowest crime rate in America, except if you count the killings.
Yeah. There you go. I mean, how can I answer that point? Or as they, when when a lower federal court overturned the D.C. gun ban, a chorus went up from D.C. government officials saying, but we can't afford to have one of our most important crime-fighting tools taken away from us. And my first thought was, we give them any more tools like that, we're going to have to move Gun Owners of America farther away from the District of Columbia than it is, because even with all our guns, it won't be safe. So, these people are so detached from reality. But I must say, in deference to the mayor, then Mayor Barry, the gun control law in the district has worked as well keeping guns out of the district as the drug laws kept them out of his hands. So, and
of course, I'm not sure they were in his hands, but he was found to have.
Maybe it was actually in his body by the time they found it. Anyway, we don't have to get into that. The point is, obviously.
Well, what was the law in D.C.?
The law said simply that you cannot have a handgun, if you didn't have one before 1976 and had it not been registered at that time. And if you had a long gun, you had to have it trigger locked and in a safe. And as soon as you brought it out and took that lock off, you'd broken the law.
So in other words, if a bandito, a murderer, criminal of some kind, came into your house, you'd have to say, hold on, please.
Let me break the law for, give me 5 minutes.
Yeah, give me 5 minutes. I've got to get my gun out of the safe, got to take off the trigger lock, and then we'll be.
Oh, and I can't keep it loaded, so I have to load it as well. So cut me a little slack. And so no wonder they
How could they be so insane?
Well, I think more important to the socialist mind, which is what we're talking about, especially the District of Columbia, and the government over them, which is the Congress of the United States, constitutionally.
That's right.
These people have a control freak mentality. And as the announcer says on my show, I have a weekly radio show, Live Fire, it's not just about gun control, it's about control. That's what these people are really concerned about. And if somebody says, wait a minute, I know that if I call 911, I'll probably be dead by the time that they get here. So if I'm going to have any protection, it's going to be right here, and if I'm right-handed, right here. And that drives the socialists nuts. The idea that people would assert their personal sovereignty, which is theoretically what it's all about in America. You and I are part of the sovereignty of this country, not the sovereign officials working in our government. And if you take that away from the sovereign, you've really pulled off a coup d'etat.
Now, what did the appeals court say?
Appeals court had a surprisingly good decision.
This was Larry Silberman.
Lawrence Silberman wrote for the majority, and he said, look, militia means every free man had to have a gun throughout colonial America. And you would actually get fined if you did not have a gun. So their idea of gun control was exactly 180 degrees from what we think of as gun control. And he pointed out that the word state in the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of people to keep bear shall not be infringed, that word state wasn't a reference to the state militia of New York or Virginia. It was a reference to a free society. And so that, I thought, was, you could have added a few things, but really it was an excellent decision.
But then you had the supposedly pro-Second Amendment Bush administration with a Solicitor General who really tried to mess things up.
Sure did. And when the Solicitor General tries to mess things up, that's even more serious than if a guy off the street comes in with his own off-the-wall, friend-of-the-court brief. They put a lot, even the conservatives on the court, put a lot of stock in what the Solicitor General says on any case.
What did the Solicitor General do?
It seemed as if he'd been reading George Orwell's 1984. So on the one hand, really a nice discussion that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms. Well, that's an important concession from the statists because a lot of circuits have been ruling in years past that it doesn't protect. You had to belong to the militia of the state of New York before you could have the privilege of having the right to keep and bear arms.
Of course, everyone belonged to the militia in those days.
In those days. But of course...
What was it, 18 to 44?
Well, anywhere from the beginning of the settlements in North America, you had a militia. You had laws in New England and in Virginia that on your way to church, you better have a gun. If you don't, we'll fine you. Because they knew that that would be a place where...
Larry, we're going to have to take a break.
Sure.
When we come back, I want to go in greater detail into the Solicitor General's argument, and then the good news that Dick Cheney and a majority of the members of Congress broke with President Bush and the Solicitor General.
Right.
And that had a positive impact on the debate. Stay with us. We'll be back right after these messages.
Hi, I'm Congressman Tom Tancredo. You know, I just returned from a hearing on the southern border in a place called Brownsville, Texas. One of the participants in the hearing told us that for them, a border really doesn't exist between the United States and Mexico. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people have that attitude, that there are no such things as borders, that they really don't matter, that they're just lines on a map and nobody should pay attention to them, and that we're all just residents of the North American continent. Well, you know what? That's baloney. It's baloney, but only if you will do something about it to prove to the people of this country, and especially to your elected officials, that you know borders matter, that you know the sovereignty of this country is at risk, and that you will take action to make sure that they understand it. That action is best taken by calling your local talk radio stations, writing letters to the editor, and of course, letting members of Congress know that you know. That's the best thing. They're hoping, as a matter of fact, that no one really picks up on this issue of a North American trade association that essentially eliminates borders. But the fact is it's happening. You can see parts of it all of the time. So it's something that we need to stop. America, and I mean the United States of America, not the continent, but the United States of America is at stake. Do your part.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips with our guest, Larry Pratt, Executive Director, Gun Owners of America. Larry, we were talking about the D.C. gun case and the fact that President Bush's Solicitor General filed a less-than-perfect brief following the decision of the Court of Appeals.
We can certainly call it less than perfect. Now, it did have one nice feature. As I was saying just before the break, it did treat very nicely the fact that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms. But as I was just beginning to point out, it was like he'd been reading George Orwell's 1984. Slavery is freedom, war is peace, and individual right to keep and bear arms means you can keep, well, maybe nothing. Depends if a federal judge thinks it's reasonable. Now, I realize that's not lawyerese, but I just cut to the chase.
It was tragic that the person making the case to uphold the Silberman decision said, oh, yes, of course, there can be some restrictions. And John Paul Stevens jumped in on that, and that guy really blew what could have been a winning argument.
Could have been. And we were afraid that even our side might agree that infringe doesn't mean what it means. And so those
shall not be infringed except.
Exactly. We were able to see Judge Stevens rewrite or try to rewrite the Second Amendment in broad daylight and public view. Well, could we say that it means shall not be unreasonably infringed? So there, just one little word, that's all it was. So he took from an absolute to something that is total judge control, which was what, of course, he was trying to fight for.
So what happened with Cheney and the members of Congress who decided to rebuke the Solicitor General?
Well, they saw what the Solicitor General had done, and frankly, I wish it were better than it had been. What they were really saying was, no, the judges don't have the ability to determine how to infringe. That's our job in the Congress. again, not a lawyerly presentation, but trust me, that's what it really boils down to. Now, the fact that Cheney broke from the president and went with some of the more conservative members of Congress.
Even Democrats.
Even Democrats. How embarrassing is that, right? They're Democrats and people that aren't all that conservative taking a much better position than the George Bush administration. So the fight really is over that word infringed, and that's why maybe it was a little bit impertinent, but we put a definition from an early 19th century dictionary into the brief just in case the judges might have trouble saying infringe.
I have to say your brief was brilliant.
Well,
it was done by Bill Olson and Herb Titus.
They are just two of the best.
And I've used it as a training manual in a homeschool course that my wife and I teach to 4 of our grandchildren.
Wonderful.
There was so much in there of English history, American history, St. George Tucker, all of this stuff. Blackstone.
I told some students that I was speaking to, if you'll read that brief, you're going to know more about America's colonial, early Republican period than 95% of those coming out of school, certainly a government school.
It was fantastic.
Well, then they asked me, now, do you want to push the envelope a little further? I said, what do you have in mind? He said, well, this could be viewed as contempt of court. I said, I'm interested. Does it show? The point is, we put in the brief that the founders had made all these petitions about all the long chain of abuses that had been suffered and had not been addressed. Their petitions fell on deaf ears. Then the Brits began to try to close down American government, and they tried to close down the militia. And at some point, they made it so intolerable that our forefathers had to fight back by force of arms.
That provoked action in Lexington and Williamsburg. It got Patrick Henry's dander up, etc.
And so, too, this generation is watching, we pointed out, what this court is doing. Now, I thought that was, on the edge. Well, the state of Montana, controlled by a Democrat legislature, showed that we were just drinking milk and cookies.
Tell us about that. That was a tremendous step that the Montana took.
Legislature, under control of the Democrats, passed an almost unanimously approved resolution. Governor signed, a lot of other state officials signed. They all wanted to be on this thing. That said that, well, a lot of whereases and therefores, but the one that really catches your attention, if the court were to rule that infringement can be done on the Second Amendment, that will put into question the continuing validity of the compact with which Montana entered the Union.
So their very statehood could be negated by a bad decision.
Down south, they would call that secession. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that is only they're not just joking. These people are really quite serious about.
I've been to Montana. I know that.
Yeah, it's a very serious proposition, and frankly, there's probably enough oil in Montana they could be quite happily independent. They're right under Alberta, Canada, and the Albertans really think like Americans, like Montanans. They're not like the rest of Canada at all, and they've been talking about kind of tearing the blanket with the folks back east. So who knows where this could go?
How did the court react to that brief from Montana?
Well, we don't know. It wasn't discussed, but they
it certainly got their attention.
They transmitted it. It wasn't actually put in as a friend of the court brief, so the Secretary of State got a letter to the editor published in the Washington Times, so I'm sure it got read maybe even better than some of the briefs.
Larry, we'll do this again at the end of the show, but I want to encourage our viewing audience to contact Gun Owners of America to get a copy of the GOA brief.
It's right there on the website.
And what is the website?
Gunowners.org, and just look for Heller, D.C. versus Heller, and it'll go right to not only our brief, but also the resolution of the state of Montana. We thought that was pretty good and worth memorializing.
Now, what are the other impending disasters or opportunities facing gun owners?
Well, one of the good things that has happened following Katrina, which was a constitutional disaster.
Where they tried to confiscate the people's guns.
And in fact, some National Guardsmen did, some California Highway Patrolmen did. And the response in the Louisiana legislature was to say that's illegal. And Steve Scalise, who was then in the State House,
just elected,
now will be in the U.S. House, just elected, defying the trend of Republicans losing. This guy won overwhelmingly. Well, because
and he's one of your guys.
He is absolutely one of our guys. He is a very articulate, hardworking defender. He took the Katrina news video that we captured and put on our website, and when people in his own legislature couldn't believe that guns had been confiscated, popped open his laptop, went to our website, showed those videos, their jaws dropped, end of argument, bill passed. Now, even better was what Senator Vitter and then Representative Jindal got passed through the federal Congress, and now the state of Utah is matched at the state level, that any peace officer under their jurisdiction, be it a federal marshal or whatever, or state police or whatever in Utah, if they take your gun, not only is it illegal, but unless they're arresting you for some crime, they take your gun under any other pretext, like walking down the street after an earthquake or a hurricane. You can sue them personally, and if there's a settlement against them, they pay it personally. It's their house that'll be on the line. And I think that's going to keep a lot of cops' hands off a lot of guns.
That's great. Well, I'm a life member of the Gun Owners of America, and I'm proud to be. How large is your membership?
We're at about 300,000. And
wonderful.
We involve those members, as you know, in what we're doing up on the Hill.
By the way, your mailings are great. You not only ask for money, you explain not just what you're doing, but what Congress is doing, what the White House is doing, and what your members ought to do
to impact on it.
And
right.
It's very practical, very specific. You know, a lot of people criticize direct mail, saying, well, what good is a petition? What good is this? What good is that? But your mailings are very specific, and they have an impact on the course of history.
And they frequently are going to have a postcard which goes right to your own Congress critter. And then if you can get on the web, you go to gunowners.org. We have a free email subscription, as you know, and that just means that you can be involved in a fight that may be over by the time the newsletter gets published.
Yeah.
But
we're going to take another break here. When we come back, we'll have some parting words from Larry Pratt with more information about how you can become involved in the work of defending the Second Amendment rights, which existed even before we had a country and a constitution. Stay with us. One of the major activities of the Conservative Caucus is Constitution education. We want to help raise up a new generation of leaders who understand the underlying principles of the Constitution and the meaning of its key provisions. Through programs such as Conservative Roundtable, through mailings, workshops, conferences, seminars, we strive to communicate the legacy of the Founding Fathers. Each year, we commemorate Constitution Day, September 17th. We publish newsletters, action bulletins, and other materials to promote an understanding of and fidelity to the Constitution, and we work with members of Congress who share our vision and share our concern. We hope you will decide to work with us as well by becoming a supporter of the Conservative Caucus.
www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. We're on the air now in more than 120 communities. And if you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, I hope you'll check out our website, conservativeusa.org, or drop us a line at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. No cost, no obligation. We'll send you newsletters, other information, or you can fax us with your name and address at 703-888-9300. 281-4108. Larry, unfortunately, we just have a bit more than 2 minutes left, and there's so much more we could discuss.
Right.
We could discuss guns on campus. We could discuss things, but I throw the ball to you. What do you want to discuss?
Well, I think the issue that in the future is going to be a very important benchmark as to where somebody really stands on the Second Amendment is whether they are willing to push for elimination of these gun-free zones, because the only people that have benefited from them have been the mass murderers. And the folks that have been playing by the rules have been dying by the rules. And it's an insanity that only a liberal could like. And so we've got to put an end to this. The state of Utah has a law that says anybody with a concealed carry permit can be on any school campus, and you can't do anything about it unless they break law. Well, they haven't had a problem in Utah. They did have a mass shooting, multiple shooting in Utah, but it was at a mall that said no guns, not in the schools. Isn't that instructive? We think that what happened at the New Life Church in Colorado Springs was the other bookend. There's where people could defend themselves. Hundreds of lives were saved. The bad guy was dead in 30 seconds. Police got there another 5.5 minutes later. He could have done horrible things had he not been stopped.
That's great. Tell us again how people can learn more about GOA.
Easiest way is just to go to gunowners.org. We do have a toll-free number. Glad to have them call. As you say, information, no obligation. It's 888-888-6-GUNS. It's 888-886, and then letters GUNS. And,
Larry, the Democrats are afraid to use the gun issue now because they know there's so much support that it's a loser politically.
And what's so odd is so are the Republicans. They're afraid to use it, even though at one time it put them into the majority.
Larry, we're out of time. Thanks for being with us.
Good.
And thank you for watching Conservative Roundtable.